The Mississippi River begins quietly in northern Minnesota, at a place called Lake Itasca. The lake sits among forests of pine and birch, and the water that leaves it is narrow enough to step across in some places. This small stream winds through the woods, moving slowly over rocks and fallen leaves, gathering water from springs and smaller creeks as it flows south. The river at its beginning is modest and unassuming, nothing like the wide expanse it will become hundreds of miles downstream. The water is clear and cool, reflecting the trees overhead, and it moves with a gentle persistence that will carry it across nearly half a continent. As the river flows away from its source, it begins to grow. Tributaries join it, each one adding their own water to the flow. The river widens gradually, becoming deeper and slower. The landscape around it shifts from dense forest to rolling hills, and then to flatter terrain where the water spreads out and moves with a quiet steadiness. The current is not fast, but it is constant, always moving in the same direction, always finding the path of least resistance as it makes its way toward the sea. The Mississippi moves through different types of land as it travels south. In some places, the banks are lined with tall trees whose roots reach down into the water. In other places, the river flows past fields and meadows, the water reflecting the open sky. The river changes character with the seasons, rising in spring when snowmelt and rain add to its volume, and settling lower in the drier months of summer and fall. These changes are gradual and predictable, part of the river's natural rhythm that has repeated itself for thousands of years. The water in the river is not still. Even when the surface looks calm, there is movement beneath. The current flows strongest in the middle, where the water is deepest, and more slowly near the banks where it brushes against the land. The river carries sediment with it, tiny particles of soil and rock that have been worn away from the land upstream. This sediment gives the water a slightly murky quality, a soft brown or gray color that shifts with the light. The sediment settles out in slower sections of the river, forming sandbars and small islands that emerge when the water level is low. Islands appear throughout the length of the Mississippi, some large and covered with trees, others just bare stretches of sand and gravel. These islands shift and change over time as the river deposits sediment in some places and carries it away from others. Birds nest on the islands, and plants take root in the soil that accumulates there. The islands provide quiet places in the middle of the river, undisturbed spots where the water flows around them on both sides, creating gentle eddies and slow currents. The river passes through Wisconsin and Iowa, forming a natural boundary between states. Here the landscape is a mix of forest and farmland, and the river is wide enough that you cannot easily see from one side to the other. Bluffs rise along parts of the riverbank, tall hills of limestone and sandstone that the river has carved around over millions of years. These bluffs are covered with trees and grasses, and they stand as quiet witnesses to the river's slow work of shaping the land. In Minnesota and Wisconsin, the river flows through an area that was once covered by glacier. The glacier left behind a landscape of lakes and wetlands, and the Mississippi winds through this terrain, connecting waterways and draining the low-lying areas. The river here is part of a larger network of water, a system of streams and marshes that all eventually flow toward the same destination. The water moves slowly through these wetlands, filtered by plants and reeds before it continues downstream. The river supports a quiet abundance of life. Fish swim through its waters, moving with the current or holding still in the eddies behind rocks and logs. There are catfish that rest on the bottom, feeling their way through the murky water with their whiskers. There are bass and pike that hide among the underwater vegetation, waiting patiently for smaller fish to swim by. Turtles sun themselves on logs that float near the shore, their shells dry and warm in the sunlight, and they slip back into the water with barely a sound when disturbed. Birds are drawn to the river, finding food and shelter along its banks. Herons stand motionless in the shallow water, their long legs perfectly still as they watch for fish. Egrets wade through the shallows, their white feathers bright against the dark water. Ducks paddle along the surface, dipping their heads under to feed on plants and insects. In the fall and spring, migrating birds follow the river, using it as a guide on their long journeys north or south. The river provides a corridor through the landscape, a path that birds have followed for countless generations. The floodplain alongside the Mississippi is a wide, flat area that the river spills into when its water level rises. This flooding is a natural part of the river's cycle, happening most often in spring when rain and snowmelt increase the volume of water. The floodplain is fertile land, enriched by the sediment that the river deposits when it overflows its banks. Trees grow in the floodplain, species that can tolerate having their roots submerged for part of the year. Willows and cottonwoods thrive here, their seeds carried by the water to new places where they take root and grow. The river has always been a pathway for movement. Long before roads and railways, people traveled along the Mississippi, using canoes and boats to move through the landscape. The river connected different regions, allowing the exchange of goods and ideas between communities that lived along its banks. The current made it easier to travel south and north, and people learned to work with the river's natural flow, drifting downstream and then finding ways to return upstream when needed. Native peoples lived along the Mississippi for thousands of years, building their lives around the river's rhythms. They fished its waters, hunted in the forests along its banks, and grew crops in the fertile soil of the floodplain. They understood the river's cycles, knowing when it would rise and when it would fall, and they built their settlements in places that would not be overwhelmed by floods. The river was central to their existence, a source of food and water, a route for travel, and a presence that shaped their cultures and stories. The river appears in many stories and legends, often as a powerful but not threatening presence. Some stories describe the river as a living thing, with moods and intentions of its own. Other stories treat it as a constant feature of the landscape, something that has always been there and always will be. The river was sometimes seen as a boundary between different worlds, a line that separated one place from another, and crossing the river could carry symbolic meaning in these stories. The river scale is remarkable but not overwhelming to contemplate. From its source in Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi flows for more than 2,000 miles. It drains water from an area that includes all or part of 31 states, making it one of the largest river systems in the world. The water that flows past any given point on the river has come from many different places, from small streams in the Rockies, from rainfall in the Appalachians, from springs and lakes scattered across the interior of the continent. All of this water finds its way to the Mississippi, and the river carries it all toward the sea. As the river flows south through Illinois and Missouri, it is joined by other large rivers. The Illinois River adds its water, and then the Missouri River merges with the Mississippi in a confluence that significantly increases the flow. The Missouri brings water from the northern plains and the mountains far to the west, and where the two rivers meet, the Mississippi becomes noticeably larger and more powerful. The water from the Missouri is often more turbid, carrying more sediment, and for a distance downstream, the two waters flow side by side before they fully mix. The Ohio River joins the Mississippi further south, near the border between Illinois and Kentucky. The Ohio is a large river in its own right, draining much of the eastern interior of the country, and its addition makes the Mississippi even wider and deeper. After the Ohio joins, the Mississippi is a truly massive river, its surface stretching wide between distant banks, its current steady and powerful. The water moves with a quiet inevitability, flowing south with such volume that it seems less like a river and more like a slow-moving inland sea. The river passes Memphis and Vicksburg, cities that grew up along its banks, places where people gathered because the river provided transportation and commerce. The landscape here is flatter, and the river meanders across the land in wide curves and loops. These meanders shift over time as the river erodes one bank and deposits sediment on the other, gradually changing its course. Old channels are left behind when the river cuts a new path, creating oxbow lakes that lie quiet and still beside the active channel. The bottomland forests along the lower Mississippi are thick with trees that thrive in wet soil. Cypress trees grow in standing water, their trunks wide at the base and tapering as they rise. Their roots form structures called knees that stick up above the water's surface, helping the tree to breathe. Spanish moss hangs from the branches of many trees, long gray strands that sway gently in the breeze. The forest floor is often flooded, creating a maze of water and land where the boundary between river and forest is unclear. Wildlife in the bottomlands includes animals that are adapted to living in wet environments. Alligators rest along the banks in the southern stretches of the river, their bodies motionless as they absorb warmth from the sun. Frogs call from the shallows, their voices filling the air at dusk. Beavers build dams in smaller streams that feed into the river, creating ponds that provide habitat for fish and waterfowl. The bottomlands are rich with life, a complex ecosystem where water and land intermingle. The river has changed over time, both naturally and through human influence. Levees have been built along much of the lower Mississippi to contain the river and prevent it from flooding adjacent land. These levees are long earthen embankments that run parallel to the river for hundreds of miles, keeping the water within a defined channel. The levees have altered the river's behavior, preventing it from spreading across the floodplain as it once did. The river is now more confined, its flow more controlled, though it still carries the same immense volume of water toward the Gulf. Barges move slowly along the river, carrying cargo up and down its length. They are pushed by towboats, flat-bottomed vessels designed for the river's shallow and shifting bottom. The barges transport grain, coal, petroleum, and other goods, using the river as a highway that connects the interior of the continent to the sea. The towboats move at a steady pace, their engines creating a low rumble that carries across the water. At night, their lights reflect on the river's surface, small points of brightness moving slowly through the darkness. Locks and dams have been constructed on the upper Mississippi to maintain a navigable channel for these boats. The locks allow vessels to move between different water levels, raising or lowering them as needed to overcome the river's natural gradient. The dams create pools of slack water where the current is minimal, making it easier for boats to travel upstream. These structures have changed the character of the river in some places, turning sections of flowing water into more lake-like environments. But the river continues to move, and the water still finds its way to the sea. The river's influence on weather and climate is subtle but present. The large volume of water moderates temperatures in the surrounding area, keeping the air slightly cooler in summer and warmer in winter than it would otherwise be. Moisture evaporates from the river's surface, adding humidity to the air and sometimes contributing to fog that settles over the water in the early morning or evening. The fog is soft and white, muffling sounds and reducing visibility, creating a quiet, enclosed feeling for those near the river. The delta begins to form as the river approaches the Gulf of Mexico. Here the land is almost perfectly flat, barely above sea level, and the river splits into multiple channels called distributaries. These channels spread the river's water and sediment across a wide area, building new land as the sediment settles out. The delta is a place of constant change, where the boundary between land and water is always shifting. Marshes and wetlands dominate the landscape, with grasses and reeds growing in the shallow water and mudflats appearing and disappearing with the tides. The wetlands of the delta are home to many birds. Pelicans glide over the water, their large wings beating slowly as they search for fish. Ibises wade through the shallows, using their long curved beaks to probe the mud for food. Roseate spoonbills, with their pink feathers and distinctive flat bills, move through the marshes in small groups. The wetlands provide nesting sites and abundant food, making them an important stopover for migratory birds that travel along the Gulf Coast. The river finally reaches the Gulf of Mexico, and here its water mixes with the salt water of the ocean. The transition is gradual, with the river water spreading out over the denser seawater in a layer that extends far out into the Gulf. The sediment carried by the river settles out in the Gulf, forming underwater deposits that have been building for millions of years. The flow of fresh water into the Gulf creates a plume that can be seen from space, a lighter colored area spreading out from the river's mouth, slowly mixing with the darker blue of the open ocean. The amount of water the Mississippi carries to the Gulf is immense. On average, the river discharges hundreds of thousands of cubic feet of water per second into the ocean. This water comes from rainfall and snowmelt across a vast area of the continent, collected by thousands of streams and tributaries, all of which eventually find their way to the Mississippi and then to the sea. The river is a gathering place for water, a final channel through which a significant portion of the continent's runoff reaches the ocean. The sediment the river carries has built the land along the Gulf Coast over millennia. The Mississippi Delta is composed of layers of sediment deposited by the river, and these layers extend deep into the earth, a record of the river's work over millions of years. The land continues to build in some places and erode in others, a dynamic process that reflects the river's ongoing interaction with the sea. The delta is a living landscape, constantly being shaped by the flow of water and the deposition of sediment. The river's journey from its source to the Gulf takes weeks for a drop of water to complete. The water moves fastest in the upper reaches where the river is narrower and the gradient steeper, and slower in the lower reaches where the river is wide and flat. Along the way, the water is joined by water from countless other sources, and by the time it reaches the Gulf, it has traveled through many different landscapes and climates. Each section of the river has its own character, but all sections are connected, part of a single continuous flow. The seasons bring different qualities to the river. In spring, the water level rises as rain and snowmelt increase the flow. The river spreads wider, and the current grows stronger. Trees along the banks may stand with their roots submerged, and low-lying areas become temporary extensions of the river. In summer, the water level often drops, and sandbars emerge. The current slows, and the river takes on a more placid appearance. Fall brings cooler temperatures and changing colors in the trees along the banks, and the river reflects these colors, its surface mirroring the reds and yellows of autumn leaves. Winter can bring ice to the upper reaches of the river, though it rarely freezes completely, and the water continues to flow beneath any ice that forms. The river has inspired many songs and writings, often portraying it as a symbol of movement and continuity. The Mississippi appears in music that speaks to its vastness and its role in the lives of people who lived near it. The river is often described in terms that emphasize its constant motion, its journey from beginning to end, and its connection to the heart of the country. These artistic expressions capture something of the river's presence, its ability to evoke feelings of both solitude and connection. The river's soundscape is subtle. There is the gentle lapping of water against the shore, the quiet rush of current moving past an obstacle, the occasional splash of a jumping fish. Birds call from the trees along the banks, and insects hum in the warm air. At night, the sounds are softer, with the water creating a continuous low murmur that blends with the sounds of the surrounding landscape. Standing by the river, you become aware of these sounds gradually, as they form a background that is easy to overlook but always present. The river's color changes with the light. In the morning, the water may reflect the soft pink and orange of sunrise, its surface smooth and glassy. At midday, the river is often a dull brown or gray, the color of the sediment it carries. In the evening, the water takes on the colors of the setting sun, sometimes glowing with gold or amber light. At night, the river is dark, its surface barely visible except where moonlight catches the ripples and waves, creating small glimmers of reflected light. People have always been drawn to the river, finding in it both practical value and a source of quiet contemplation. The river provides water for drinking and irrigation, a route for transportation, and a place for recreation. But it also offers something less tangible, a sense of connection to something larger and more enduring than individual human lives. The river has been here far longer than any person, and it will continue long after. Its presence is constant, a feature of the landscape that grounds those who live near it. Fishing along the Mississippi is a quiet activity that brings people to the river's edge. Anglers cast their lines into the water and wait, watching the surface for signs of movement. The river holds many species of fish, and the patient fisherman may catch catfish, bass, or crappie. The act of fishing is often less about the catch and more about the time spent beside the water, the slow passage of time, and the connection to the river's life. The river provides not just fish, but a place to be still and attentive. The backwaters and sloughs connected to the main channel create quieter environments where the current is minimal. These areas are often thick with vegetation, and they provide important habitat for young fish and other aquatic life. The water here is clearer and calmer, and it supports a different community of plants and animals than the main river. Dragonflies hover over the surface, and water lilies bloom in the summer, their white or yellow flowers floating on broad green leaves. The bridges that span the Mississippi are engineering works that allow people and vehicles to cross the river. Some bridges are simple and functional, while others are elegant structures with graceful arches or suspension cables. From a bridge, you can look up and down the river, seeing it from a perspective that reveals its width and the way it curves through the landscape. The bridge itself becomes part of the river's environment, providing perches for birds and casting shadows on the water below. The river's flow is powered by gravity. Water always seeks the lowest point, and the Mississippi's journey from the highlands of Minnesota to the sea is simply water following this natural tendency. The river does not rush or hurry. It moves at the pace that the landscape allows. In steeper sections, the current is faster, and in flatter sections, it slows, but the overall movement is steady and unceasing. The river is patient, taking whatever time is needed to reach the Gulf. The tributaries that feed the Mississippi are themselves significant rivers. The Arkansas River, the White River, the Red River, and many others contribute their water to the Mississippi, each one draining its own portion of the continent. These tributaries have their own characteristics, their own landscapes, and their own communities of life, but they all share the common destination of the Mississippi. The river system is a vast network, with water flowing from high elevations down through countless channels, all converging toward a single path to the sea. The Mississippi River Basin is home to diverse ecosystems, from northern forests to southern swamps. Each ecosystem is connected to the river in some way, either directly through streams and wetlands, or indirectly through the influence of the river on climate and water availability. The river ties these ecosystems together, creating a web of relationships that extends across much of the continent. Water that falls as rain in one place may eventually reach another place hundreds or thousands of miles away, carried there by the river system. The river's presence has influenced the development of cities and towns. Many communities grew up along the river because it provided access to water and transportation. The river allowed goods to be moved between different regions, facilitating trade and commerce. Cities like St. Louis and New Orleans owe much of their historical importance to their locations on the river. Even today, the river continues to shape the economies and cultures of the places along its banks, though its role has changed with the advent of modern transportation and technology. The forests along the river provide habitat for animals that range far beyond the riverbank. Deer come to the water to drink, and their tracks can be found in the soft mud. Raccoons forage along the shore, searching for crayfish and other food. Bobcats and coyotes move through the bottomlands, hunting for prey. These animals are part of the river's ecosystem, even though they may spend much of their time away from the water. The river provides a resource that supports a wider community of life. The river in winter has a quiet beauty. The water may be dark and cold, and ice may form along the edges where the current is slowest. Trees along the banks are bare, their branches stark against the sky. The landscape is muted, with browns and grays dominating, and the river reflects this subdued palette. There are fewer birds and less activity, and the river feels more solitary, more introspective. The water continues to flow, undeterred by the cold, moving steadily toward the south where the climate is warmer. The spring floods bring renewal to the floodplain. When the river overflows its banks, it spreads nutrient-rich sediment across the land, enriching the soil and supporting the growth of plants. The floodwaters create temporary pools and wetlands that provide breeding habitat for amphibians and spawning areas for fish. The flood is a disruption, but it is also a regenerative force, part of the natural cycle that has sustained the river's ecosystems for thousands of years. The river's path through the landscape is not straight but meandering, with wide curves and bends that loop back on themselves. These meanders form because the river's current is not uniform. Water flows faster on the outside of a curve, eroding the bank, while it flows slower on the inside, depositing sediment. Over time, this process creates the characteristic sinuous shape of many rivers. The meanders shift gradually, and the river's course today is different from where it flowed centuries ago, though the overall path from north to south remains the same. Sandbars appear in the river where the current slows and sediment drops out. These sandbars are temporary features, appearing and disappearing as the river's flow changes. They provide resting places for birds and basking spots for turtles. Some sandbars are bare and sandy, while others support sparse vegetation that takes root when the water level is low. The sandbars shift with each flood, rearranged by the force of moving water, and they are a reminder of the river's constant work of reshaping the landscape. The Mississippi carries more than just water and sediment. It also carries nutrients, dissolved minerals, and organic matter from the land it drains. These nutrients support the growth of algae and aquatic plants, which in turn support the fish and other animals that live in the river. The river is a conduit for energy and matter, moving resources from one place to another, connecting distant parts of the landscape in a flow that is always in motion. The river's influence extends beyond its banks, shaping the land and climate of the regions it flows through. The presence of such a large body of water affects local weather patterns, and the river corridor provides a migration route for birds and other animals. The river is a unifying feature of the landscape, a thread that ties together different ecosystems and communities, both human and natural. The lower Mississippi is lined with levees, and behind these levees are towns and farmland that would otherwise be at risk of flooding. The levees are maintained and monitored, a constant effort to keep the river contained. Despite these efforts, the river is powerful, and high water can strain the levees, reminding people that the river is a force that cannot be completely controlled. The river tolerates the levees but remains fundamentally wild, its behavior still governed by the same natural processes that have always driven it. The river's mouth is a place where the journey ends and begins again. The water that flows into the Gulf will eventually evaporate, forming clouds that will move across the continent and fall as rain, starting the cycle anew. Some of this rain will fall in the Mississippi's watershed, and it will make its way back to the river, flowing south once more toward the sea. This cycle has no beginning or end. It is a continuous loop that has been operating for as long as the river has existed. The river at night is a place of quiet and shadow. The water moves in darkness, its surface barely visible, and the sounds of the night fill the air. Owls call from the trees, and the gentle splash of water against the shore provides a steady rhythm. Bats fly over the water, catching insects in the dim light. The river continues its journey through the night, unlit and unseen, its presence felt more than observed. The river in moonlight takes on a different character. The surface reflects the moon's light, creating a silvery path down the center of the channel. The banks are dark shapes, and the water glows softly, a ribbon of light stretching away into the distance. There is a stillness to the scene, a sense of timelessness, as if the river and the moon have been engaged in this quiet conversation for eons, and will continue for eons more. The river story is not one of dramatic events but of slow, persistent change. It is a story of water flowing, of sediment being carried and deposited, of land being shaped over millions of years. It is a story of life finding ways to thrive in and around the water, of communities forming along the banks, of people learning to live with the river cycles. The river is not a place of sudden transformations but of gradual unfolding, a process that continues at its own pace, indifferent to the hurried concerns of human life. The Mississippi is a river of continuity. It has flowed for millions of years, and it will continue to flow for millions more. The water that passes any given point is always new, yet the river remains the same. It is both transient and permanent, a paradox that captures something essential about the nature of rivers. The water moves, but the river stays, a constant presence in a changing world. The river invites a kind of patience, a willingness to slow down and observe. Watching the river, you become aware of the passage of time in a different way. The water flows, and you can mark its movement, but the river itself seems timeless. It is a presence that encourages stillness, a reminder that not everything needs to be fast or urgent. The river moves at its own pace, and there is a calm in accepting that pace, in letting go of the need to hurry. The river's journey from source to sea is a long one, but it is not a difficult journey. The river does not struggle or strive, it simply flows, following the path that gravity provides. There is a simplicity to this, a kind of clarity that comes from having a single purpose. The river moves toward the sea, and everything else is secondary. This focus, this unwavering direction, gives the river a sense of purpose that is both profound and uncomplicated. The river is a place of refuge for many creatures. Birds find food along its banks, fish find shelter in its depths, and mammals come to drink from its waters. The river provides for these creatures without effort or intention. It simply exists, and its existence is enough to support a community of life. There is no transaction, no exchange. The river gives freely, and the creatures take what they need. The river's flow is a kind of meditation, a continuous movement that requires no thought or decision. The water flows because it must, pulled by gravity and guided by the shape of the land. There is no choice involved, no hesitation. The river is what it is, and it does what it does, and there is a peace in this acceptance, in the absence of struggle or doubt. The river at dawn is a place of soft light and gentle sounds. The water reflects the pale sky, and mist rises from the surface, creating a veil that softens the landscape. Birds begin to call, their voices tentative at first, then growing louder as the day begins. The river is quiet, its surface smooth, and the world feels new and unhurried. There is a sense of beginning, of potential, though the river itself is unchanged, continuing its endless journey toward the sea. The river in the heat of summer is a place of stillness. The water level is lower, and the current is slow. The air is thick and humid, and the landscape along the river is lush and green. The river provides relief from the heat, a source of cool water and a place where the air feels slightly less oppressive. The river in summer has a languid quality, a slowness that matches the pace of the season, and everything feels suspended in the warm, heavy air. The river in autumn is a place of transition. The trees along the banks change color, and their leaves drift down onto the water, floating on the surface like small boats. The air is cooler, and the light has a different quality, more golden and slanted. The river flows through this changing landscape, carrying the leaves downstream, a visible sign of the season's passage. The water is the same, but the world around it is transforming, and the river witnesses this transformation, patient and unchanging. The river is a teacher of acceptance. It flows around obstacles, finding new paths when old ones are blocked. It does not resist the shape of the land, it conforms to it, moving through valleys and around hills, always finding the lowest path. The river does not fight, it simply moves, and in this movement, it accomplishes its purpose. There is a lesson here about working with circumstances rather than against them, about finding the path of least resistance not out of weakness but out of wisdom. The river's patience is its most remarkable quality. It takes thousands of years to carve a canyon, millions of years to build a delta. The river is never in a hurry. It moves at the pace that conditions allow, and it accepts this pace without complaint. The river does not wish to flow faster. It is content to be what it is, to do what it does, at the speed that nature provides. This patience is a kind of strength, a quiet persistence that achieves great things over time. The river is a reminder that movement does not require urgency. The water flows steadily, continuously, but not frantically. There is a calmness to the river's movement, a sense that it has all the time in the world to reach its destination. And perhaps it does. The river is not bound by human concerns about time. It exists in a different temporality, one measured in seasons and centuries rather than hours and days. The river at its end is much like the river at its beginning, water in motion, finding its way through the landscape. The difference is one of scale and context, but the essential nature of the river remains the same. It is water flowing toward the sea, pulled by gravity, shaped by the land, carrying sediment and life, a continuous process that connects the highest points of the continent to the lowest. The river is both simple and profound, ordinary and remarkable, a presence that requires no explanation and offers no resistance. The river flows, and in its flowing, it sustains and shapes and connects. It moves through the landscape like a slow breath, in and out, continuous and essential. The river is always leaving and always arriving, always the same and always different, a paradox that resolves itself in the steady, patient movement of water toward the sea.